Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for another episode of OC Spotlight, the only show that takes a look at the most amazing people and incredible organizations making an impact right here in our community. Today, we got a good one. Claudia Shambo, our Public Affairs Director, is going to bring him in right now. Hey, Claudia.
Hey, Paul. Hey, welcome, listeners, to OC Spotlight on the March 29th, 2018 edition. My guest today is Olivia Astanasiadis, curator at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. Of particular interest today is the Vietnamese Oral History Project exhibit known as Viet Stories, Recollections, and Regenerations, currently on display at the museum now until May 28th. A little bit about Olivia herself. She joined the library and the museum back in 1991, and as supervisory curator, she oversees collections maintenance and preservation, galleries renovation, exhibit specialists, museum techs and interns. As well, she collaborates with the director and colleagues to support the National Archive Register Administration's strategic mission and goals. We may call them NARA at a later point. She participated in the transition of the institution from the private Richard Nixon Library and Birthplace Foundation to the federal government when the Nixon Library became part of the Office of Presidential Libraries, administered by the National Archives and Records Administration, a federal facility, in July of 2007. Olivia is a member of various museum organizations, including the American Alliance of Museums, the California Association of Museums, Registrar's Committee of the Western Region, has been a peer reviewer for the Museum Assessment Program of the American Alliance of Museums. Prior to joining the Richard Nixon Library Museum, Olivia was a collections associate at the Autry National Center. She attended UCLA, then completed her Bachelor's of Arts at Cal Poly Pomona and her Master's of Arts in Museum Studies and Exhibition Design at Cal State Fullerton. She joins me in studio today. Welcome to OC Spotlight, Olivia.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
It's lovely working with you, meeting you at the wonderful exhibit opening on the 24th. Congratulations on your current installation, Viet Stories, Recollections, and Regenerations. It's a phenomenal collaboration between the Richard Nixon Library Museum and the Vietnamese Oral History Project, which includes UCI's Professor Linda Vo and the assistant, the assistant director of the project, Trom Le. So congratulations on that.
Thanks again.
Well, first, a little bit about the Vietnamese American Oral History Project. It was launched at UCI in 2011.
Right.
There was an exhibit at the old county courthouse about, I'm thinking time races, but it was in 2015, as it was a commemoration of the airlift of the last the fall of Saigon. Mm-hmm. So that was when the county exhibited much of what we were able to see. Tell us, though, Olivia, about this dance, the two parties, the UCI faculty and oral history staff, leading to this collaboration with you and leading to the presentation that we do see at the Richard Nixon Museum.
Well, and sometime back in June of 2016, our director, Michael Elzey, had spoken to Kathy Eiler, Director of Federal Relations at UC Irvine, regarding an exhibition.
Do they meet regularly about, what's going on under your hood? How about your hood? I mean, is that a kind of an institutionalized thing, or this was pure accident?
Our director is very out there in the public. A lot of it's important to have outreach, and he's very, very, very social, and he knows quite a lot of people in the Orange County area, basically because of his background, having been running, the Great Park area. There was a department that he was in charge of, and he's very well known in the area. So we're very glad that he had this interaction, only because I had been thinking and bringing somewhat of an interesting exhibit like this that the Smithsonian Institution was actually promoting a travel exhibit on the history of Vietnamese refugees. But this was more of a local thing for us. I mean,
intimate and personal, like the library setting.
Exactly. So it's basically the history of Vietnamese refugees, their influence in our area in Orange County, blending their culture and history and becoming part of the American flavor, of life. Their story of migration to this country needed to be told in our, space. It was a great opportunity to meet Dr. Vo, Linda Vo, and Tram Le to get this going. So we organized it. They co-curated, guest curators for us. So it was a wonderful local effort, and it was worth pursuing.
How did that collaboration? I mean, as far as you have sort of your way of going about business at the library and museum, and they had sort of there's a little experience with their previous exhibition and all that. So you probably brought lots of different skill sets into making this what it is.
Well, yeah, but we all had to kind of cool our heels because we were in the middle of a major renovation at the library.
Oh goodness!
So we had preliminary meetings about how to expand Dr. Vo's ideas, and
Yes.
and she and Tram brought in artwork and fashion items into the mix, things that hadn't been part of the older exhibit.
It was all new.
Yeah, so it was like a regeneration there for this exhibition. Viet Focus became, Viet Stories, Recollections and Regenerations. So we got going really after November and December of 2017. By then, all the parts had, come in together.
That was fast.
Yeah,
That's a fast exhibit.
We were thinking 2016, all the planning that they were doing, and then finally since we opened in 2016, we were still working on this in November and December. By that time, we had all the particulars that were required. We do loan paperwork. We call the lenders, get all that together. An exhibit design had been put together by an independent exhibit designer, Mr. James Dim, working with Dr. Vo and Tram Le. And so the museum staff and our leadership fully collaborated with Dr. Vo and her contacts to bring a unique story to the Nixon Library about those Vietnamese Americans who immigrated to this country after the fall of Saigon in 1975.
So I'd like to give you a chance to talk about a little of how you put together. It was a phenomenal event, as I was just alluding to earlier, on February 24th, and you had quite the roster of local institutions, political, entrepreneurial, and cultural. You had Janet Nguyen, now a state senator, Viet Thanh Nguyen, an accomplished, a sought-after novelist and thinker, and Tony Lam, the entrepreneur who was changed. His whole career changed on a dime with what he set up in Little Saigon. So, you gave them. It was kind of a wonder of. They had all the time that they were going to take, and it was sort of nobody got rushed. So in a way, it was like another kind of mini oral history with what each one of them brought. It was so how
you're right. That was so unexpected.
Yeah.
The opening reception was a huge undertaking for us.
I imagine.
Dr. Vo and Tram, especially because of their enormous outreach in their contacts with the Vietnamese American public. Having State Senator Jan Nguyen there, and presenting an achievement award to both Linda and Tram was phenomenal. There was OC Supervisor Andrew Doe there,
Yes.
and as well as UCI's Dr. George Van Abely, the Dean of the School of Humanities. It was a huge roster of brain there. It was wonderful to have them learning about their backgrounds. And yeah, you're right. With Dr. Nguyen, Viet Thanh Nguyen, his story about how he was raised and how his family had to endure was just remarkable.
And he had to do a massive edit on that. I've seen him at other venues, and he has a lot to say about his upbringing and his own sort of decisions he makes when he is creating literature. And it's a very interesting sort of work and rethinking in progress with him. So, as I said, the installation that will be there until May 28th. So that's the May 28th itself. That's Memorial Day. So just to
Right.
be clear, that's closed on the Memorial Day, or is that's the last day you're open?
That's the last day the show
I
is
always want to
open.
find out until.
So if the public comes visit us during Memorial Day, it'll be open to the public.
For those of you who just tuned in, you're listening to OC Spotlight. I'm your host, Claudia Shambach. My guest is Olivia Anastasiadis, Supervisor Museum Curator at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. Along with the help of UCI's Professor Linda Vo and oral historian Ms. Tram Le, Olivia organized the current exhibit, Viet Stories, Recollections and Regenerations, which incorporates the history of refugees and immigrants from Vietnam through historical photographs, documents, artifacts, oral history interviews, and original artwork by prominent Vietnamese American artists. So we could finish this whole show just about talking about, we could pick up every rock and look underneath it at the exhibit, but this was different having original work, and the 24th, the artists were present, that their standout original work that's there that
Right.
explains sort of the whole saga if you look closely at the work and carefully. It's a remarkable pairing with the oral history collections that you installed there,
Yes,
exhibit.
That's right.
So tell us a bit about the, well, let's like behind the scenes now with the curator. What kind of a feeling is going on? What kind of feedback are you seeing with patrons that are coming in? Do they know? Are they just coming to a regular visit of the museum and library and they, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was there? Or is there a steady flow of people who've been waiting to see yet another oral history and other relics from the Vietnamese Americans in the area?
Well, we've had positive feedback from guests who
No doubt.
who regularly come. We're going to come anyway, but because of the outreach that has been really the push to have Vietnamese Americans come visit us by Dr. Vo and Tram, a lot of the wonderful outreach done at UCI and their Facebook page and our Facebook page, but mainly Dr. Vo encouraging through the Vietnamese American Oral History Project to have this this outreach be more, highly profiled. We've had quite a lot of interest. We have scheduled educational tours that have included specifically going into the gallery for kids to learn about the history of not necessarily the Vietnam War, but what happened afterwards. So this is what's important about this exhibition. It's not about the war, it's about what happened after and the aftermath in these people's lives and how they rebuilt and became part of this area.
Or you could also say what happened in the war. What happened to some people that we have our perspective. We weren't embedded in that experience,
Right.
and so that's what I've noticed from other oral history projects. It was their war. They were living in it,
Yeah.
day in and day out, and that will come out of their stories in there. So I'm always wanting to make sure when I talk about museum installations that listeners intentionally set aside sufficient amount of time to take this in. This is a very dense exhibit.
Right.
There are so many different messages that come out, and I think it's maybe you could do this visual on the audio medium, and we've got a little visual there, that you could talk about the artful way in which all that innumerable number of I don't know if they were Polaroids and snapshots have been displayed in two different portions
Right.
of the galleries.
Yes, Mr. Dinglay's work. It's fantastic work. I'd never seen it before.
I don't think anybody had.
And as it was described to me at first, it was images that he had found from antique shops or places that he would visit when he went to Vietnam.
Yeah, they're Vietnamese
Yeah,
stock.
these photographs had been left behind, and he collected all this using techniques that he learned from his aunt, who was a seamstress. He decided to sew these Polaroids together almost as if like a web.
Or a quilt,
You can say that too.
in a
yes,
way.
in
a
a way,
sort of
yeah.
lacy quilt.
Yeah, and it tells a story. It's like a story quilt, indeed. And
And they're rather imposing. They're how many?
Uh-huh.
They're like a story and a half tall.
Shoot, yeah. And they have so many panels. So we found that the proper way to display those were in like a square. This was the original configuration.
Yes.
But because we didn't have enough space, we were able to hang them sort of differently in that little square room that you saw. They're one behind the other, It's just layers and layers of images in a web. And they're fragile, yet they're strong because of their stories. They're black and white.
All the metaphors.
Yeah,
and
they're
it's
just
immersive.
Yeah, it's immersive, and it's difficult to walk away from it. So we're very glad that he was included in the show.
It's a marvel. So it is a really. You notice when patrons come that they realize they're there for a while longer than they realize because it takes so much. Each case, there's
Right.
a case of letters, I want to say ephemera, but it never says enough when you say ephemera. It sounds like something that could just poof into dust when you touch it.
And it could, but there's a lot of information, certificates, letters, licenses,
clothing, suitcase where we can
Yes,
imagine what it's
right.
like to leave, and with very little with you.
very little, yeah.
Well, it's remarkable. And are there any kinds of reflections on what some people took away from their seeing this exhibit? Do you have any little stories to tell us? Some kind of.
I think from what I've gathered, it's been interesting to see how when they got here, the American public, the people who worked with them, military folks, volunteers, people who opened their homes, there was this trust. There's real need to help someone in need. And the Vietnamese Americans were in need. And so we were all lucky. We were able to open our homes. They came in, they learned, they saw, and they taught us, how to make a business flourish, how to concentrate and make something out of nothing remarkable, So for me, that was a lesson. Yeah.
Something to think about in 2018. the waves. So I was thinking too of the patrons, if there's some kind of a response there, and whether, because I know from the previous exhibition where they're all assembling, not everybody's ready to tell their story, or they're never going to tell their story. But do you notice at your exhibit that now seeing it, that some people think, okay, now it's my turn, it's my time, I'm ready to give my story?
I think Linda has been contacted and been told that.
Okay,
at first,
really? Men and women alike?
Well, not sure about men and women alike, but I know there was one gentleman whom Tramp said they've been trying to get him to tell his story, and I think they might have been able to get going on that.
And it's in both Vietnamese, or they're mainly Vietnamese narratives, correct?
One of the speakers who was on stage talked about telling her story, and she said she didn't think that her story was at all important.
That's the challenge for the History Project, I've heard.
And then seeing it on the wall, having people look at it, having people understand what her family went through, and empathizing is, she eventually, from what she said, it was worthwhile. It was one, and I loved listening to her talk about her experience, well modulated, well articulated. I mean, it was out there, and the tears that came out of her eyes was just, it was very, it was sincere, open, and want to hear more about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also the receiver of the story. It's really important to honor, and there's a sort of asymmetry of the intensity of the experience of the narrator and the not necessarily so intense of a personal background from the listener of the story. So it's sort of like honoring that, it's easy to listen, but it's hard for them to tell it.
This is very emotional.
Yes.
I think that I understood this exhibit was going to be emotional because of the oral story, the oral tradition.
Correct.
That these folks have been able to share with us. But telling the story, I mean, vocally, you can hear, a lot of that pain and that struggle, yet at the same time, the happiness in being able to be in a secure environment, being able to flourish again. It's something that people find hard to understand. And so when they come, if they can come see this exhibition, they'll learn more about human nature, and challenges and obstacles that can be removed if you get yourself on a positive thinking level.
And hard. Not everybody's equipped with the same resilient DNA kind of. So I know there's events right around the corner. On April 12th, there will be in the evening, I happen to know 5:30 to 9:45 in the evening, a reception and a film. So tell us about that event and maybe a little teaser for the May 19 event.
Yes, this what's cool about this exhibition, obviously, is the things that come with it. The opening reception was fabulous, and we met a lot of folks that wouldn't have come to the library. But this coming April 12th, we will have a film by Ham Tram, Journey from the Fall. It's on its 10-year plus anniversary. It will be shown at 7 o'clock. And what Tram and Dr. Vo have done, we're able to secure quite a lot of folks to help with, at the end of the screening, there will be a Q&A with cast and crew, and it'll
Wow.
include the legendary actress Q Shin. And it'll be moderated by Isa Le, the executive director of the Vietnamese American Arts and Letters Association, or VALA.
Wow.
So it's going to be, again, another one of those very interesting, high-profile
That's April
events.
12th, folks. So mark your calendar.
There's a reception 5:30, so and there'll be goodies, and the exhibit area will be open to the public as well.
So are all the question answer? Will that be in English? And or well, like Tram Le was there to
I think it's going to be bilingual.
It will be bilingual,
Tram
and
will be
that's
there.
really rich
Yeah.
to hear
Right.
how that's done. Yeah, and Tram's got a flair for that, and
She speaks beautiful, and
Yeah.
I love listening to her.
yeah,
Yeah.
that actually it's lots of fun to watch her. And what's a little teaser for the May 19th event?
Oh,
Just short of
well,
the exhibition's
it's-
closing.
It's sort of it's still in the planning stage. It's very early, but they're planning a special food and art event, and hopefully the food will be Vietnamese, probably more like finger food, but it'll be kind of nice.
All right.
No.
It's an elaborate cuisine, so
Yes, it is.
that's something to look forward to starting now. Well, moving along past this exhibit, there's other attractions. There's the permanent collection on and displays. There's interactive exhibits. Is the house back off aside
Right.
on the site, away from the structure of where the museum is presenting these different exhibits. That are the hours different between the two, or is the house open as long as the museum is open?
Right, that's correct. And the birthplace, as you know, is a home built by President Nixon's father, Frank Nixon, back in 1912, and the president was born there in 1913. The only Nixon, youngster that was actually born in a home.
Okay, yeah. And so when I was doing a little bit of work on a little research on this, and I saw it was a lovely video of you, and you're giving a tour of the Lincoln Continental limousine that trucked the president around, and you
How
were
old is that?
1999.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I was thinking that with that and with other kinds of attributes of the Nixon White House, sort of fast forward to 2018, it just seems like there's a whole couple generations of technology and all that have sort of changed all of those protocols. So does that quaintness sort of come to you when you're sort of keeping the history intact at the library?
Yes and no. Interns that come to the library, I tell them, I didn't get a computer till 1993. And it was more like one of those 256K DOS systems.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So today's technology, I can do everything on my
Your
tablet
phone.
or on my phone.
Yeah.
So it's a huge leap forward, but somehow we've been equipped for it. Museums are always on the forefront of looking for that technology that will be immediate and more helpful to the public. So we're always looking to update, and I think it took the library just a little longer than most, but we came into the 21st century and it needed a renovation, and it was accomplished.
So along with that was that heady project of transitioning from the private foundation to the system of presidential libraries. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the tapes team? How that it was first a private property, but I guess there was lots of legal work to make it a public commodity, which it was designated, but there were certain legal and administrative hoops to go through in that transition.
Right. I always tell folks to go to archives.gov so they can look at the entire story of that transition. You will find that very...
Just that? Archives.gov, and you get there?
Archives.gov, very well, and...
At Nixon Library.
You can go ahead and do the search Nixon Library, and the history of our transition will pop up. But a short story is that in about 2004 or 5, the foundation reached out to the Office of Presidential Libraries, so the National Archives, about a transitioning into the federal system. There have been tries before in the 1990s and in the mid-1990s as well. Late, but finally in 2004 and 5, we built the extra wing that is there at the library. So what we needed to do was have space in order for us to demonstrate that we could take on the collection. So the director and the family worked together to try and change the law. They worked with Congress and appropriations folks, and the law was changed to allow for the Nixon sequestered artifacts and documents.
Sequestered by the family first, or
No.
by the National Archives?
Sequestered by the Senate.
Really?
yeah,
That's where it was?
Well, basically, when President Nixon left office, they
In
were afraid that
1974?
Senate was afraid that he would take his tapes and burn them.
Oh, sequestered it from him, not from the
So
public.
everything was sequestered from the president, and that's the reason why there's so much history of legislation. I mean, litigation between the president and the National Archives. But it all came to a head finally. The library became a federal entity. Eventually, we who started working during the transition became part of the Nixon presidential materials staff after 2005. And in 2007, the agreement was made to have the library roll into a federal library as part of the National Archives, Office of Presidential Libraries. So as a presidential library, a federal library, we have finally celebrated our 10th anniversary.
Congratulations
And
on
we're
that
going
last
on
year.
more.
Yeah.
Yes, I had the privilege to work for the private Nixon Library beginning in 1991, but without knowing all that background, all that information, all that made me a likely candidate to work in the current federal library really did help. And so I'm glad to be part of the National Archives and the Presidential Library itself. The worth is worthwhile. You need committed people who want to talk about presidential history with all its warts, and that's us. And we're there for the public.
So, as we wind this interview down, I guess I wonder, in preparing this, I'm wondering if you kind of develop yourself sort of a retroactive relationship with the Nixon family.
The Nixon family has always been very close to folks administering the library, the private library. The family's still working with us because we borrow artifacts from them.
Okay, they sort of
So-
cycle in some
Yeah,
things.
we
Here's
do.
a costume, here's a
No,
book, or
we-
here's a something, a wand.
Things cycle in during rotations of special exhibitions. We do borrow from them,
Okay.
for those things, and but we have annual loans with them as well.
All right.
And they have also recently deeded many things to us, so they continue their relationship with the library, with our director, as well as their foundation director.
Okay. Well, Olivia Anastasiadis,
Yes.
really, it's been a real pleasure getting to know more about what you're doing and seeing what a wonderful home, a platform that you've given the Vietnamese oral histories that are in the exhibit known as Viet Stories, Recollections and Regenerations. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
My guest on this program at OC Spotlight was Olivia Anastasiadis, Supervisory Museum Curator at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum, and talking mainly about the exhibition there until May 28th. That's all the time we have. It's been good talking with you. Mike, next week we've got more wonderful things on tap. I just want to thank Paul Roberts once again for engineering today's live show. Always good things on tap in the following weeks. Thank you for listening, everyone. Talk to you next week.
You've been listening to another episode of OC Spotlight, the only show taking a look at the amazing things and incredible organizations making a difference right here in our community. Only on OC Talk Radio, Orange County's community radio station.